you think about it, Decade's a pretty weird season. I think I have to explain what an anniversary season is to kind of explain my headspace going into the series. For those of you who don't know what an anniversary season is, it's a pretty simple concept. A season meant to pay tribute to the older seasons or works in the series. Think how Avengers Endgame tributes the Phase 1 Marvel movies, and some of Phase 2 as well, with the whole time travel gimmick. In this case, we have an idea of it, or a similar concept, with this series, in its own way, paying tribute to the 9 previous Heisei series, as well as some of the older series, before kicking off the next season of Rider, or the next era of Rider with Heisei Phase 2, or Neo Heisei. This series also introduces the concept of the multiverse in a way to combine all the Rider worlds, or Rider verses, that were basically disparate and separate before now, as each season took place in its own universe up until the events of Decade happened. And then, well, Zeo will happen, but we'll save that for when we get to Zeo and that kind of confusing mess. But just to let you know, going forward from Decade to Zeo, or well, to Build in all honesty, each Rider season takes place on the same world. Again, up until the events of Build. Anyway, this series will also spark a lot of things that are now traditional for Neo Heisei or Phase 2 Heisei. Basically, this is the bridge between what Kamen Rider was in the first phase of the Heisei era and what it will be in the next phase. So, I think we have to go over that plot, shall we? We follow one Tsukasa Kadoya, a random amnesiac who finds his way, he basically forces his way into a job/living space in the Hikari photo studio. He's kept in line by Natsumi Hikari, the granddaughter of the studio's owner, Ejiro Hikari. And, well, it's kind of hard for Tsukasa to be working at a photo studio because his photos are always so weird. They always come out distorted and strange, with Tsukasa blaming it on the fact that, well, he's not from this world and it's the world's way of rejecting him. Which confuses Natsumi because, well, that makes no sense to her. Then randomly, a massive swarm of kaijin attack. Yes, various kaijin from across the various Heisei shows randomly show up and attack the city, with Tsukasa obtaining the powers of Kamen Rider Decade to combat them. Kamen Rider Decade also being known as the Destroyer of Worlds, a being that's been haunting Natsumi's dreams. Well, Tsukasa manages to fight off the kaijin using the power of every previous Heisei rider. Everyone that we know of. Because Decade's main gimmick is the fact that he can use the powers, aka suits, of every previous Kamen Rider that he knows of. Yeah, this does go forward into him being able to use Phase 2 Heisei in later series and even some Reiwa, apparently. But he has the power of every Kamen Rider that he knows of. So he has to actually know the rider in order to use their powers. He also gets a message in this case. He's given a message by, well, Wataru. Yeah, because production of these things are pretty close together, they probably just had Wataru's actor around, so they decided to just use him for this bit, where he tells Tsukasa to, well, go across the 9 Rider worlds, or AR worlds, in order to bridge them in order to stop the upcoming Rider War. Something that's haunting Natsumi's dreams, and is spelling the end of all existence as the Riders have to fight each other for one world to remain dominant. Oh, and remember that thing about Tsukasa using the power of every rider up to that point? Well, after his debut fight, all of his cards go blank, and now he has to reobtain the power of the riders he once had. And that's basically the gimmick for the show. Tsukasa going between the worlds, regaining his power that he had at the beginning, and, well, learning about each of the various 9 worlds he goes to, while obtaining the power of every Kamen Rider, as I stated beforehand. Anyway, he also has another ability known as the Final Form Ride, in which he could turn a respective rider into a respective, somewhat representative weapon, allowing him to basically team up in his own way. Anyway, after winning this fight, he's, well, off to the worlds, or, well, accidentally, as upon returning to the photo studio, A backdrop falls, and the gang finds themselves stuck into another world. In this case, the world of Kuga. So yeah, it's not just Tsukasa, it's the entire photo studio crew, as they have to seek the power of the other riders, and hopefully prevent the destruction of all realities, or all the rider worlds. And again, they start off in the world of Kuga, but something's a bit different. Instead of good old Yusuke Godai, or even Kaoru Ichijo, we have Yusuke Onodera, a young man who's out trying to impress a policewoman named Ai, who he has the feelings for, who's this world's Kuga. Yeah, these aren't the same worlds as they are from the original show. They're AR, or alternate reality worlds. Worlds where things are similar, but different from the worlds we're familiar with. This leads to another rather unique scenario, as not only can the worlds be different, but the writers themselves can be different from how we remember them in their shows, only taking somewhat vague recollections of their original character. And then Narutaki shows up, because the series really didn't have a consistent antagonist until he showed up, so Narutaki's here. Narutaki's an odd man who has the power to travel between the worlds on his own, and has an immense hatred for Decade, warning other riders, or whoever will listen to him, about Tsukasa coming, and occasionally summoning other riders to fight Tsukasa. Normally the more antagonistic sort, such as your Oja or Hell Brothers and such and such. In fact, in his first appearance he summons the Hell Brothers to fight Tsukasa. So, yeah, now we have an antagonist, or at least a form of one, basically out of spite against Tsukasa for some reason. Oh yeah, and after the events of his own world, Yusuke ends up joining the photo studio crew, acting as a secondary writer for the series. But he's not the official one, because the official secondary writer is Daiki Kaito, aka Kamen Rider Decade. Daiki is yet another traveler of the worlds and a thief. It goes after each world's particular treasure. And he has some sort of past with Tsukasa that's never properly explained. Again, Tsukasa has amnesia and doesn't remember it, right? And Daiki isn't in a position to explain anything. He's just there to steal treasure and taunt Tsukasa, occasionally helping him out, but mostly taunting him. Why? We don't know. But everyone and their mother kind of sees them as weird exes, and yeah, even the actors kind of see them as kind of weird exes. So, the end is Decade's boyfriend. I say jokingly while actually liking the idea, mainly because it kind of explains the end's petty actions sometimes. Yeah, speaking of the end's powers, while Decade has the power of all the other riders, the end has the power to summon riders, using them as, puppets in battle, basically being able to summon allies in the middle of a fight in order to turn a one-on-one into a four-on-one. Oh, another thing is that he uses mainly a gun and not a belt like other riders do to transform. And as for our final character of this cast, there's Kivala, another Kivat who tags along after the world of Kiva, which was the second world the gang traveled to, who is at first working with Narutaki, but later on somewhat betrays him to join our group. And basically stays on the sidelines throughout most of the series, acting as a comic relief character. And she does become important later on, though, so I have to mention her. If there's anything to really love about Decade, it's its cast of characters and how they play off each other really well. Tsukasa is essentially, he's a big arrogant asshole, and I kind of love him for it. And has a lot to learn about being a writer from the other writers he encounters, while also teaching them in his own way. But despite how arrogant of a prick he can be, he's deep down a caring person who cares about his friends and allies in the studio, and the various other people he comes across on his journey. Of course, Natsume's around to keep him in line, and a honestly kind of funny sibling relationship the two have. And Yusuke is there to basically serve as, Tsukasa's best friend character. But with Yusuke oftentimes not involving himself in fights, but being the butt of jokes and basically being a comedy act. But I kind of love him, even if he doesn't get to fight as much as he probably should. Overall, I honestly do enjoy this cast as a kind of road trip team, and I wish the four would come back in a more substantial fashion, because Decade keeps coming back. It has always partnered with Daiki and never with the other two, and I'm kind of sad about that. Now, if you haven't really noticed it, I haven't talked a lot about villains or plot, and, well, Decade doesn't have a plot, as the mimetic line of Decade has no story represents. For the most part, the story is Tsukasa going between the worlds and playing the hero and villain of this story and trying to stop the Rider War. As I said earlier, the Rider War is essentially a prophecy of destruction, with the worlds merging and the Riders having to fight each other to prevent, well, their own worlds from being extinguished by the destruction, with only one rider managing to stand on top of everyone else. This is a vision that Natsumi has in the episode 1 and a kind of Power Rangers and a kind of Power Rangers Megaforce style dream of the great battle. But this is far better. Anyway, the source of this destruction always turns out to be Decade. And, well, this was also supposedly Narutaki's main reason for trying to kill off Tsukasa, to prevent the destruction of the worlds. As again, Tsukasa as Decade is the destroyer of worlds. And again, as I say supposedly for Narutaki because we never find out anything about him, even now. He's a complete mystery, and he just shows up and, well, summons people to fight Tsukasa and leaves, and later gets involved in fights on his own, but that's basically his only role in the series, is to be antagonistic to Tsukasa and not explain anything. Honestly speaking, I like the concept of the Rider War, this kind of one final battle where everyone has to fight each other, a la Ragnarok, and only one can survive, even if it's reluctantly they have to fight other heroes because they have to protect their own families or family. But despite how big of a plot point this is, it really rarely is ever mentioned or all that important until the very end of the series. But hey, it's a pretty cool backing for the cause of everything. And hell, we really don't know what's causing outside of Tsukasa's existence. And, well, it's not the whole crossing the worlds thing, because Daiki and Narutaki can do that, and they don't seem to be causing this effect. It's only a Tsukasa-style effect, probably caused by the powers of Decade. But that feels weird to say, considering the fact that what we learn about the Decade system, what we learn from the specials and movies. Overall, Decade's main plot is just not really there. It feels like some of the bad seasons of Doctor Who, where there are a bunch of very standalone episodes that fail to combine into one solid one. And honestly, that's what I can compare Decade to, Doctor Who. A series of various adventurous one-offs with some pretty unique locales and interesting characters running across our main heroes. And there's another thing Decade's infamous for, and well, that's his episode count. Decade as a series only has 31 episodes. Technically 31's a special episode, but it's counted into the main episode count. So it's really 30, but on paper it's 31. Most Rider seasons go close to 50. Some ending either around the 40s or on episode 50. But not this one. This one ends at 31, mainly because, at the request of Bandai, the toy manufacturers, Toei cut the season short so that they could split the release dates of Super Sentai and Kamen Rider. Beforehand, I don't have concrete evidence of this outside of dates. They appeared to air, or at least premiere, one after another, in a very similar style. Nowadays, Super Sentai will air a new season in May, or March, well, I meant to say March, and Kamen Rider will start their new season in September. One beginning in the spring and one beginning in the fall, 6 months later. Honestly speaking, this kind of makes sense in terms of, well, toy sales, in order to, not overcrowd your own market. But it still kind of sucks because Decade had to be a season that had to suffer because of it. So, yeah, Decade lost about 9 or so of its episodes, and, well, lacks an ending that doesn't help either. Yeah, this series is infamous for lacking an ending. The show just kind of ends on episode 30. Again, 31 is a special episode, so it doesn't really count. We also have this weird preview thing that's not really anything. Yeah, that weird preview at the end of Decade, yeah, that's just there. No one really expected to lead to anything. It was just extra footage that they shot for no reason. So even though it looks like it might bleed into something, it doesn't. It's just filler. In fact, the show's ending was so bad and so notorious, so controversial, that Toei was almost sued for it because the entire series was seen as nothing more than a commercial for the movie. That kind of sucked. It's kind of funny now considering the fact that we have shows like Demon Slayer that basically air a chunk of their next season as a movie, although they also go backwards and air those episodes on TV, episodes that would be the movie on TV, so I guess back and forth. So, yeah. I'm going to say final thoughts on Decade as a whole till after the movie, because that's basically the actual ending of Decade. But, one handful of more thoughts. Decade's OP, Journey Through the Decade, is probably one of the best in the franchise so far. It's really great, and Gact sings it so great. On top of that, Next Decade is amazing as well. I'm specifically pointing at the Gact versions of them because there's a secondary version that was recorded by the Kamen Rider girls, and again, I think Gact's voice works better than the kind of peppy Kamen Rider girls version. And while I'm not too fond of it, Treasure Sniper is a pretty good bop. And yeah, overall, Decade's pretty good, but again, don't go trying to dig too deep into this rather shallow well. Before we sign off, let me give a count of my 5, no, there are only technically 9 worlds that I can count before we get to the secondary half, and those aren't really AR worlds. So I'm just going to go with my 3 favorite Rider worlds. The world of Kiva, which is an alternate reality where Wataru is still a young child, and the King of the Fangire, who has ushered in the age of coexistence between humans and the Fangire. It's a pretty interesting world. It's probably one of the very few that we have humans and monsters living in peace with each other. The world of Blade, which is, well, a world in which the Kamen Riders work under a giant corporation, which they kind of did do in Blade, but this one's more official, and they have a highly stringent ranking system for determining who can transform and, well, who ends up washing the dishes. That actually does make sense in context, and it's kind of a funny two-parter, and they even make fun of Blade's speech impediment. And because I have to, it's my boy, the world of Fies. Even though it's just a Kamen Rider high school. It's just a high school setting. Smart Brain's a high school. It's just that simple, but I kind of do love it because Fies. A special mention goes out to the world of Hibiki for having a world where people train to become Oni, and the world of Ryuki, which is essentially Phoenix Wright with Kamen Riders. I said it. I'm not explaining it. That's what it is. just look it up. Just look up World of Ryuki. It's great. It's Phoenix Wright, but everyone's a Kamen Rider. Yeah. So yeah, I'll see you guys when we get to that movie after a handful of book episodes. Till then, everybody.